This is an episode of Unconfined, a podcast of the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future in Baltimore, Maryland. You can find us online at clf.jhsph.edu. Mike Milley is our sound engineer and produced our theme music. Your hosts are me, Tom Philpott, and Christine Grillo. Paulette Wilson is a producer, and Natalie Wood-Wright is the executive producer. The opinions expressed here are not necessarily those of Johns Hopkins University or of the Center for a Livable Future.
This episode of the Unconfined Podcast continues our exploration of regenerative agriculture and what that term means to different people. Today, we have special guest Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin with us to talk about what regeneration means to him and what keeps him busy. Regi is a farmer and author and CEO of Tree Range Farms, which is a cooperative of farmers grazing chickens under trees. He was born and raised in Guatemala, and while he was educated formally there, he also likes to weave an indigenous framework of thought into his work. In 2018, he was elected as an Ashoka Fellow to honor his commitment to transformative ideas and problem solving for the good of all. He's also the founder of the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. Welcome, Regi, and thank you for joining us on Unconfined.
It's a great day to be unconfined.
I'm really excited to talk with you about your ideas regarding land and regeneration and realness, all of which extend beyond agriculture. But before we do that, we should probably get to know a little bit more about Tree Range Farms, and I'm hoping you can tell us about what happens there and the concepts behind what you're doing.
Yes, sure. Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate the conversations. The company, Tree Range Farms, is the branding, contracting, marketing, and distribution arm of a business ecosystem. That business ecosystem includes farm enterprises, a nonprofit organization, a poultry processing facility, and many other partners in the system that perform multiple and different specialized functions as part of that business ecosystem. So Tree Range Farms is born not as the beginning, but rather as one of those pieces in the process of launching this regenerative ecosystem, the regenerative business ecosystem, as we call it. In a way, we are part of the assembly of this double-sided expression of what we understand as regenerative systems. One side is the landscape and the living systems that we work with, and the way those processes are arranged that then generate business opportunities that then have to mimic and mirror what's going on the land, including people and crops and so on. And so Tree Range Farms simply, it's one of those components, and it is the key in the branding, marketing, contracting, and distribution of the products of the ecosystem, starting with chickens, which is the centerpiece of our launch and startup strategy.
Right. And I should mention that this is in Northfield, Minnesota. Is that right?
We are based out of Northfield, Minnesota. Our current area of concentration is the bordering region of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. If you take Stacyville, Iowa, we spend 3 hours drive from Stacyville. Those 3 hours drive is defined by the fact that we don't want poultry transported more than 3 hours from farm to processor. That's our current region. This is where we are currently prototyping our regional system level deployment, but our reach is already national, not in production yet, but in many other ways. It's already national.
And so I've heard you talk about chicken heaven. I'm wondering, can you tell me what makes your farm chicken heaven?
Let's do a little homocentric exercise, because otherwise, anybody can define what you just said. But what would make a place feel like heaven to us, to you and me. I mean, scientists says, and the industry says that the thermostat set up at 72 degrees, right? Somewhere 40 to 50% relative humidity in the space where you are. If you find a place like, and then I lived in one of those places, it's called Tecpan, Guatemala, where the temperature is more or less like that. The sun and the clouds and the rain and the greenery and the landscape and the smells of the flowers and the friendliness of people, all of that is kind of makes it feel like heaven for us, right? Okay, well, we tend to extrapolate that into animals. The difference is that we tend to impose our human-centric ideas into the animals. And so a chicken heaven is simply a place that is in alignment with what the evolutionary process of the chicken defined it, in terms of what it likes. Does it, and so the chicken wants shade. It wants to be under the trees. It evolved in the jungles of Southeast Asia. It wants a place to go and fetch, bugs and run and jump and pluck its feathers after it rains. It wants a place to perch when it does that. It wants to be able to get up in the morning and run around, find food and water, all of those things. What we have done is, to the extent that we are intellectually capable of understanding that, we have tried to look at the world from the perspective of the chicken and then built their version of the Tecpan Guatemala for me.
Right. And you've mentioned before that chickens are jungle fowl. And so now you're kind of returning them, allowing them to be their true selves.
Yes, basically, allowing, although that means, we have the ability to control that, of course. And so allowing is a term that is conflictive because of its meaning. But yes, in this case, we are literally, I would say, facilitating the process by which then the poultry that we raised is integrated into its ancestral geoevolutionary habitat. And then our responsibility then is, instead of using our homocentric and colonized vision of how to raise animals, we then have to force ourselves to use more of the indigenous intellect and the ancestral wisdom in order to be able to the extent that we can, because we can, a great extent, see the world from the perspective of other beings rather than just ours.
I want to talk about that some more, but I'm curious about sort of the mechanisms of how things work on this particular farm. Like, how does the understory you mentioned chickens are living under trees. How do the trees work into the system? What do you do with the manure? How do those things work together? How are they integrated?
So if you step back a few steps to be able to see how that agronomical engineering materializes, we got to understand that we are truly not in the business of producing anything, neither trees, hazelnuts, chickens, or anything. We actually can't do that by scientifically verifiable, right? So, but what we are engaged in is the process by which we steward processes and we design and we manipulate processes by which energy is transformed from non-edible into edible forms. In this case, we're looking at CO2 that is becoming grain and other elements that are becoming grain that then we bring into a space where the chickens then eat it. As they eat it, they will pass some of it as manure. That manure then becomes energy for bugs and forages, and they are absorbed. That energy is absorbed by trees. In this case, we selectively brought in hazelnuts and elderberries because they are native to this space and they are very valuable outputs of the land. So they got great economic value, they got great ecological value, and they have an incredible social function. One of the things that I learned from the Lakota when I first came to this country was that all of their systems are designed according to the designs of the systems that they observed and learned from, including the way they organize the social structures. The Tioshpees, for example, which is the families of families, is no different than the families of families, which is how we classify taxonomically, we classify plants and bugs. So there is families of families that actually were intended to live together. Well, hazelnuts, elderberries, and chickens actually have a symbiotic relationship. And so we don't have to worry about the manure in the fields anyway, where they range. We never collected. And the reason is because we can actually agronomically and scientifically calculate the flow of energy so that there will never be excess energy, so that it keeps flowing and transforming in a way that is efficient, rather than it going down into, runoff and leaching into the ground, or being, unnecessarily evapotranspired out of the land. All of that is going to happen. I mean, the evapotranspiration is going to happen, but the leaching and the runoff doesn't have to. We can avoid that if we are actually balancing that flow of energy. That's what we have done. And so it not only creates a chicken heaven we're talking about, it also provides the poultry with many more nutrients and diversity of nutrients. And as a result of that, you end up with a density of nutrition in the eggs or the chicken that is not achievable in any other way, where confinement is the primary MO. And so this way, we're able to then also concentrate the manure during the night in the barns, which then we mechanically manipulate it to use it to continue that energy transformation where there is no chickens, but where their manure is actually central to continuing that. And so this is where we have to merge technology, mechanical efficiencies with also natural energy transformation efficiencies. And so in a lot of cases, this is where we have got lost in terms of just taking the linear approach and never understanding that there is no such a thing in regenerative systems.
Right. Wow. Okay. That's very, very cool. So when people like me and my colleagues talk about regenerative agriculture and silvopasture and agroforestry, we're talking about a specific set of agricultural practices. And when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we're probably talking about no-till, and you don't keep the land bare, and you don't use chemicals. But with you, it's much broader than that, it seems. There's a philosophy, and there's, even a politics behind regeneration when I've heard you talk about it. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about how regeneration starts with land.
Yeah, well, I don't think it does, though. Let's think about why have things degenerated, because that explains how we have to approach regeneration. And before we existed on the planet, things were 100% efficient. They were churning energy, regenerating life, because energy, by the way, it cannot regenerate, by the way. It's just simply material matter. And so life regenerates on the basis of energy flows. So energy flows were perfected over billions and billions of years to be expressed in this mass diversity of life on the planet. And that ability of that life to continue to regenerate and to evolve is completely dependent on how those processes of energy flows were perfected. We came into the picture and we started actually manipulating those things all the way back when we're still not totally degenerated the planet and heating it up, but rather just domesticating animals and crops like, wheat and oats and so on. And then we became much more aggressive as we became more concentrated and populations grew bigger, smarter in a way, but also dumber at the same time, because we started accumulating a lot more knowledge, but we did it at the cost of the wisdom to use the knowledge. And so we started to understand crops and science and molecular biology, and we go on and on all the way to genetic engineering. And that's how we degenerated, because we started to interfere with the very processes that result in regenerative outcomes. And so for us to be able to reverse that, we have to, again, start to look at the three layers by how those things happen. First, the mind, the expression, and then the materialization. At the mind level, we think about stuff. We think about domesticating an animal, a crop. We think about genetic engineering. We think about all of those things we're totally capable of doing. Then we design and sell the process, right? We express it. We go to conferences, present it to investors, to the government, to the lawmakers and all of that. And we sell that idea. And then we go on and materialize it, meaning we build it. And so the same exact way as we have destroyed almost the planet, and we are destroying effectively the planet, and we have built this system that doesn't work, the same way we have to now think. The mind has to change. We have to change in the mind how we see the living systems of the planet. Second, we have to express that and convince ourselves and others that the way we're doing things is not going to work, but there is a better way, which is designed by nature itself. And then the third piece is we have to go and build it. And so what happens in this scenario that you presented, where we are starting to think, oh, I'm going to go regenerative, so I'm going to start doing no-till, is that you're not really changing your mind. You're not really going about it in a regenerative way. The process isn't going to deliver regenerative outcomes. It doesn't matter how much you tweak linear, extractive, exploitative systems, they still deliver a level of degeneration that we cannot afford anymore. So the way to regeneration, real regeneration, is to start by understanding that things were regenerative to begin with. We're not inventing that. We're simply stopped understanding it and bought into the idea that you can actually extract the planet into extinction, and that somehow if you do something different and you call it something different, it will have a different outcome. But something is either regenerating or is not. It won't matter whether you call it regenerative or not, label it or not, market it as such. It won't matter if you make billions of dollars in a regenerative label. If it is not regenerating, the outcome won't be there, period. And that's the main thing we have to reckon with right now, which is completely intellectual, because it is at the intellectual level where everything starts. It only materializes after we have processed it like that. And unfortunately, this whole concept and this whole ancestral way of thinking, which is we owe the preservation of it to the native communities that continue to be indigenous in their ways. They're the ones we owe the fact that we still can express this and we can still have the source of how we can become regenerators. So I like to say that at this point, we have to challenge everything going on out there. We are challenging ourselves all the time, evaluating, because the slippery slope is really slippery and it's very easy to just go back straight to where we have been creating the problem that we are trying to solve.
Right. So I'm guessing that you're seeing a lot of labels, a lot of people, companies, practices claiming to be regenerative that are not what you would consider to be sincerely or truly regenerating.
Right. So let's go through this layer by layer, because I'm not judging anybody out there. The thing is, I think everyone out there legitimately has a sense that we got to do something, and they want to do something. But I don't think the strategic framework has percolated through to excite that revolutionary internal gut feeling that tells you that we got to go all the way. And so many don't have a choice. So a farmer who's got $3 million into equipment, machinery, and everything to do row crops, for them, the best thing to do is to go no-till. I got no problem with that. I celebrate that. I'm not judging that farmer. I mean, they didn't get in there out of their own decision. The government and companies in the markets actually corner them into operating that way. Now, they're not completely faultless, but it is not, I'm not going to think about it as blaming anyone. Now, on the other hand, here's a company comes in and realizes, well, there is a big market and consumers are actually willing to pay more and to buy more if a product has a regenerative label in it. Now, that's a whole different thing. That's co-opting, appropriating, that is lying, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That is blatantly false and fake. But the fact that the farmers started to do no-till, that's real, and that's important, and that is good. And so those are the layers we got to peel this through and then identify who we need to expose and who we need to support. Now, the company that comes in supporting the farmer because they are doing no-till and respects that and doesn't appropriate anything beyond that, but rather makes claims that are consistent with the verifiable outcomes and verifiable practices, there's nothing not legit about that. Even if the company is labeling that product, but to label it regenerative without actually understanding and without actually committing to actual regeneration, that is something we have to challenge all the time. Not judge, but challenge. And then intellectually trying to get these folks to look further. And what will happen as we do that is that the ones that are not imposters, the legitimate ones, will want to do more. And that I know, and I have proof that there is literally a very large percentage of everybody out there actually is in that boat. And I love that because it gives me so much hope that we will achieve regenerative outcomes. But not everybody is in there for the regenerative outcomes. Too many are there just because there's another business opportunity and another opportunity to extract and exploit the natural resources of the planet and the people who are protecting them.
I know you have some ideas about the difference between knowledge and intellect and wisdom. And I'm wondering if you could walk us through those things as you understand them as they apply to agriculture or maybe just life or the planet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things we frequently forget is that everything we know and everything we do affects everything, whether it's growing food, running to the store, or buying a car, or raising a child. When we are born, we actually come with an established set of intelligent centers. We are not born just creatures. We could be raised. If we could survive and grow up with no connection to other people, we'll still be a person, and we will still have a lot of knowledge and abilities that are concurrent with our geoevolutionary process. So that's what scientists, I guess, called innate intelligence, right? So we are born with it. And as the minute we are born, we start learning new things. Oh, if I cry, I get fed. Oh, if I do this or whatever. And we start learning and learning and learning. And that's just acquisition of knowledge through observation. And even as children, we probably meditate, even though maybe short periods of time, we still meditate because we got to process what we are learning. And that's really part of that process, right? And so we continue to acquire more knowledge, not necessarily wisdom, but in the process, we understand, I know this, and if I use it this way, it will generate this effect. And so we continue to do that. And to the extent that learning is guided and the wiser people around us, so the elders and the parents have learned that process, then they will teach us according to how they expect us to live our lives, right? So we tend to teach the kids to be respectful of the elders, to eat with their mouths closed, whatever it is. We are teaching them ways according to how we hope they will live in the future. So that is the next stage of acquisition of knowledge, and wisdom starts to filter in because those adults are hopefully going to teach us how to think about things, not just how to know about things, but how to think about them. And then as we know, and then think about these things we know that define what we do every day, then we develop ways of living, which is literally what the whole concept of regeneration is about. It's a way of living, of knowing, and then we learn to relate as we become interdependent and codependent and all of those other forms of living. And so as we do that, there is another place where we can acquire both knowledge and wisdom, which is in this case through the same process as when we were little kids, except more informed. And so for us, for example, if you are in the agricultural sector, for me, it's critical that all of us in this area are spending time meditating on the relationship of the living systems that we interact with and the living systems of the planet, which we interact with, even if it's indirectly. You know, the air you are breathing right now is eventually going to be passing through, you know, China and everywhere around the world, and it will be breathed in and out by trees, by frogs, by other people, and so on, right? So that meditation, that quick meditation, which I just did here for you, actually teaches us relationships and understanding the relationships among the living systems and how living systems are so codependent or interdependent is central to understanding how food comes to be. And then how that food then, because it inherited those relationships, then it has integrity, nutritional integrity, and all kinds of other levels of integrity. And then because then we take it, now understanding ourselves as just another living system, we are then taking that energy in the form of that expression, whether it is chickens or eggs or fruits or vegetables. It's just simply an expression of energy. And then we take that in, and then it goes on and on and on, right? So those are the levels of knowledge, wisdom, and then what we call the combination of all of it, at least I call it the indigenous intellect, meaning the combination of everything. When we acquire that level of intellectual capacity, which is it's related to knowledge, of course, because everything I learned at the university and through agriculture school is very important in understanding the biophysics and chemistry of those living systems that I relate to. But that knowledge alone was completely worthless. In fact, that knowledge alone could have turned me into one of the worst, practitioners in the world, because I could have used that knowledge to, say, start creating genetic modifications of species that are so beautifully built already. I could have used that knowledge to build more chemicals or more destructive inputs into farms. That is why knowledge in the hands of the wrong individuals that didn't learn and didn't evolve intellectually to understand the relationships of living systems, that knowledge in their hands is so dangerous, because that is exactly how we have turned something that could be so given of life, all the knowledge we have on biophysics and chemistry and all of the other aspects, economics and social. And instead, we have turned it into one of the largest weapons of mass destruction by creating over 80,000 chemicals, all designed to kill. Now, just think about the contrast of an intellectually aware individual who understands that indigenous intellectual capacity to see everything, and those who only take the parts that can allow them to further conquer, further colonize, and further extract at high expense, at a high cost. And then yet we, as we built the systems across the planet, we didn't build accountability for those individuals so that they can actually freely go. And in fact, they are the ones who are more legal than the ones protecting life on the planet. That is one of the most, I would say, most destructive things we have done as a society, but also is one of the least intellectually informed, the least wise. I don't want to say the other word, but it is one of those things that truly rendered us one of the most irrational species instead of the other way around as we pretend and call ourselves.
Right. And that whole mindset, of man against nature just seems so backwards, right? Like nature can do everything for us that we need it to do.
Well, but also think about it for a second about when we say we are working with nature. Well, who are we? Aren't we nature? Aren't we natural? Aren't we 97% carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on? I mean, we are made of very few elements combined in millions and millions of forms. Who are we? So that question, who we are, is probably the most misused and then misinterpreted and misunderstood, because we think we are like doctors of sciences here and there, masters of business management. We are business people. At the end of the day, we are simply an expression of the energy of the universe that through the processes of photosynthesis, the process of animal intervention, and the biophysics and chemistry of the planet, governed by the laws of thermodynamics, became to be this highly organized form of energy that we call a person or a human, just like every other living thing. That's who we are. But we refuse to understand that, because once we understand that, then we have to be responsible. And then we have to start doing things more responsibly if we actually embrace that identity. So that's really what I want us to reflect on as we think of this nature, working with nature, or working man against nature. All of those expressions really can be consolidated into a way of understanding who we are.
I love that answer. Was that, did you call it indigenous intellect?
Yes, the indigenous intellect, which is the combination of everything: innate intelligence, learned knowledge, co-learned. If you just sit next to someone who's doing something, you learn too. They don't even have to be teaching you. Everything we learn and the wisdom that we acquired, all of it combined with the way we live, which continues to teach us, and we continue to learn from. Again, two different things. If we peel them apart, it's what becomes what I think of as the indigenous intellect, which is everything combined.
I love that. Well, I'm wondering if, I just have a couple more questions for you. I'm just wondering, because we started to talk about this a little bit, fighting versus building. Obviously, with regeneration, it's all about building. And maybe there's a mindset shift that has to happen where instead of what have we been fighting and how do we shift toward a mindset where we're building and we're generating and we're regenerating? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, we are in a fighting mode, and it is expected, because if you think of it, we are now afraid, and fear is causing a lot of things, even though we don't necessarily interpret it that way. But fear creates stress, creates desperation, creates polarization, creates mental illness. Supports it and exacerbates it. And if you look at all of the critical indicators of societal health, all of them are right there in our face, showing that we are afraid for our lives and afraid for our children, and our children are afraid of their own future. And that's resulting in this mental disruption that then results in physical disruptions, which turns into all kinds of other things like binge eating, like drugs, and like all kinds of things. And those are all indicators that we are actually afraid, that we are in a fighting mode. And so it is no coincidence that when we come into this space trying to do something different because of all of those bad things going on around us, and regenerative agriculture is one of those good things we can do, we still approach them from the perspective of fighting something, fighting what's not working, fighting the whitewashing, corporations of the world, fighting the governments that are not doing their job in terms of protecting our common good. It's always like that. Now, the way to switch that is to really go back to that fundamental baseline understanding of who we actually are. So I grew up in a war. You probably know that. The Civil War really puts you on that fight or flight mode in a way that is not possible to experience in any other situations, except if you're being mugged or attacked or something like that. But normally those scenarios are like short-lived. They are not your whole life. And so I came into this space with no interest whatsoever on fighting anything, but rather just understanding, who am I? How can I live a life of integrity and honor and actually be able to go away from this expression of energy into my next stage with the understanding and the clarity that my life was well lived. That is a different approach than doing regenerative agriculture because you want to fight the conventional system. Now, even as we do that, I'm not naive either. We are very astute business and strategy wise. And I didn't grow up in the war without understanding, guerrilla strategies and infiltration and intelligence and disruption and capturing and expansion and all of that, right? Military strategy. So there is a space within our movement of regeneration that has to still do that, because unfortunately for us, in the conventional language, there is still enemies. There are those who want to use this newfound space to just extract more resources out of our planet and communities, hidden behind the label or the claims of regeneration. And so there has to be a portion of us, but I figured no more than like 10% of us and those with the skills to actually counteract those negative energies, not by fighting them, but by neutralizing them, because I don't want any of us fighting anyone or anything. And so within that context, there is still that negative energy that has to be balanced out, and we have to resist it somehow. But not all of us, in fact, no more than 10% of us should ever be dedicated to that, so that 90% of our energy and intellect and capacity goes into building and into the positive side of regeneration, and only a small percentage dedicated to it, which is still part of our work and our movement, is dedicated to neutralizing those negative energies.
That's really interesting to think about the regenerative movement as kind of a guerrilla action against the conventional agriculture, and how we want to move past that or make it bigger than that. I'm wondering if you can talk about, and I think this is probably the we can wrap up with this question, but I like hearing when you talk about real versus fake, and let's make America real again, and what's real regenerative versus not real regenerative. Can you say some things about making America real again?
Yeah, well, I was giving a speech at Churchtown, and we all got all excited about real regenerative and real organics, and then let's make food real again. Let's make our farms real again. Let's make our lives real again, in the context that we are living always on somebody else's idea of who we are. So we are farmers, but who are we as farmers? Well, we are farmers according to how the customers defined us. Well, if they want lettuce, then we are lettuce farmers. If they want chickens, then we're chicken farmers. Why can't we just be farmers the way we want to be? Correct? That would be real. And then, so I just kept thinking about all of that in that expression. Let's let's make food real again, and let's make America real again, just because, there is a person who made a claim of making America great again. And I thought that was exactly the opposite of what he was doing. And so we are trying to do the real thing, which is not fake, not bogus, not lame. And so that's why I thought, well, this would be the real way to make food real again and America real again, meaning let's live our real lives, not defined by somebody else, but by ourselves. That would be real for once, And so the idea of living those realities according to someone else is what I call a fake existence. We're not living, we're not being ourselves. That's not healthy for anyone. And it is causing serious societal issues, mental issues that are the result of, like, for example, you go to work 8 to 5 and you do it only because if you don't, you can't pay your rent and you can't live in this country, right? Well, that's not how reality should be. We should be able to define our reality according to the terms of employment and to the terms of how we want to exchange the super value of every hour that we live, rather than somebody else defining the value, the worth of our time, for example. And so those are inalienable rights that we have at birth that have been encroached upon and negated by the systems that have been built for the purpose of extraction. I mean, that's what we live within. But that's not real. That's actually artificially created. All the rules, labor rules and compensation rules, those were created. They can be totally different, and they can be as different as we want. Food, for example, you go to the store and you look through the over 200,000 products in the grocery stores, and then you try to see which ones of those products would actually provide you with nourishment, meaning nutrition, according to the body's needs for nutrition, so that it can regenerate and be healthy. And you will find that almost none of them actually were neither produced, processed, or delivered for the purpose of providing that real benefit, which is nutrition and regeneration of our cells and our bodies. They were developed, produced, processed, and delivered to the store for the purpose of making money. Well, that may be real for someone else. That's real wealth for someone else, but it's not real food to us. Making food real again means retaking ownership and control of that process so that we may deliver nourishment through the food again, rather than just fill, which is not only superbly expensive, despite being called cheap, right? There's no such thing as cheap food. That's an illusion. It's just we get charged for it in so many different ways that is exponentially more expensive than if we pay 2 to 3 times for actual real food, real nourishment.
Thank you so much for speaking with us about all these things. I wonder if there's anything we haven't touched on that you feel like it would be important for people to hear. Any lingering thoughts on regenerative agriculture in the small scale or the large scale?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we got to remember is that the larger scale systems that existed before this process that we have today, that we call large scale food systems, but truly the systems before that were much, much larger scale, whether there was the bison in the millions in this country or other kinds of food sources, were of many times of magnitude larger scale than this system that we call the large scale food system today. So when we talk about scale, let's remember this system only has a capacity to destroy at scale. It does, and then make money at scale. It doesn't have the capacity to feed at scale. And then, in honor to your podcast, Unconfined, let's ensure that we don't confine our minds, our bodies, or our spirits to the rules and regulations that have been imposed upon us and our society for the purpose of extracting our wealth, our lives, literally, and our labor. and the wealth of the planet for a few, while the rest of us go hungry, unnourished, and live lives limited by those who have taken more than what they deserve. That, let's unconfine our minds, our bodies, and spirits so we may see the other 99% that is being blind. We have been blinded to by the domestication system that has rendered us unable to think for ourselves and to act in our best individual and collective interest. Let's unconfine ourselves.
I like that. Thank you for that. Let's unconfine our minds. Thank you so much for being on this show, Rehi. It's wonderful to talk to you. I always feel like I've just, come back from a retreat where I've spent, days thinking. I wish you so much luck with tree range and all the endeavors that you're involved in, and looking forward to seeing how all that goes in the future.
Yeah, and if you have time, pick up my book, In the Shadow of Green Men, and
Yes.
that will give you more insights into how to think this way.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that book.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an episode of Unconfined, a podcast of the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future in Baltimore, Maryland. You can find us online at clf.jhsph.edu.